Here we are.
Hi, all.
Hi, everybody.
Good to see everybody.
Yes.
Thank you for being here. I have a slide that has our brief agenda on it, and I'll pull that up. Just a moment. I'm going to share my screen. And I believe you're seeing now my screen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. I just okay. So what we have to do is we have to talk about the nominations slate. We have to talk about a BEAC update and we'll have a brief financial update, but then we want to talk about the Lawrence Avenue property. We're going to share a little bit about end statements and strategic plan, and Heather would like to talk to us about GA delegates. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen.
And Article 2.
I'm sorry, what?
And Article 2.
And Article 2. All right. All right.
Yeah.
Heather's going to talk about GA delegates and Article 2. Carrie, would you like to go ahead, and I'll stop sharing my screen?
You're muted, Carrie.
Hi, everybody. Carrie Alperovitz-Fischel. I'm your nominating committee chair. And we have some members of the nominating committee here I'm looking, there's a lot of folks. There's Karen, wave Karen. There's Caroline, wave Caroline. Graham Smith, he's over there with in front of the fireplace. I'm not sure. I think that's our crowd. Okay. And we have a few more members. I'm sorry?
Sally, too.
There's Sally. Okay. Is anybody else? Did I miss anybody?
John's here.
And there's Peggy. So it's hard to find everybody. So who's not here is Chelsea's not here, and is John Scott here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, so there's just a lot of us. Okay. So I think we've got just about everybody other than Peggy. So this is your nominating committee. And I wanted to tell you also that we used to have Dave Berman. The bylaws say that it's a 9-member committee, and he had to drop off because he had other things in his life that he really needed to do. So, and I was going to start, maybe I could just see by a show of hands, how many of you have seen the slate already in your email? So no, okay. So I was going to start by telling you all about our process, and I really want to tell you all about our process, but I don't want to keep you like in suspense. So the first thing I would say is when we talk about our slate, there's 2 people who are serving on the board right now who are not on the slate, and one of them is Jane Kerrigan, who has decided not to pursue a second term. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank her for all of her service over the last 5 years and the last 2 years. Oh, here we go again. Over the last 2 years as president. It just takes an incredible amount of energy and effort, and it's done in service of our church. And I'm just very thankful. And the other person who's not on the slate is Stan Keeve, who's our vice president. And he's also worked very diligently and with a lot of care, and I want to thank him as well. So without further ado, the slate for the Board of Trustees will be Jan Bird, who's going to be moving from the at-large position to president. Jen Pollitt-Hill, who's been kind of do-si-doing around the board, is going to move. Remember that she was vice president, and then she went to finance, and she's learned a lot about how our church finances work, so that's good, and she's going back to vice president. I should say would, because of course the congregation has to, has to approve all of this. Staff Warren would be our finance officer. Nicole Bruno is going to be our new at-large member. And Latika Hicks, who's already been on the board for the last 2 months, serving in the place of Soren Bird, will be elected to finish Jan Bird's term. So that's the nominating committee slate. And I mean, the Board of Trustees slate. For nominating committee, there's one new person, and that's Amanda Cardone. And then Graham Smith, who you've been waving with, Peggy O'Day, Sally Wood, Karen Murphy-Cadell will each be nominated for a second 2-year term. And then there are other people on the board and on the nominating committee, but their terms aren't up right now. So they're in the middle of their 2-year terms. So for instance, I'm on the nominating committee, but I'm in the middle of my 2-year term. So you're not going to be voting me up or down. So that's our slate. I just want, yeah.
Darn. I want to vote you up.
So, I want to tell you about our process, and I hope this won't be too dry, because process could be dry, but I really want you to know how the nominating committee has been functioning this year. So let me just tell you that the role of the nominating committee, as prescribed by our bylaws, is to choose a slate of candidates, like I just told you, for our board of trustees and our nominating committee, and to present them to the congregation for ratification. And that vote is on May 21st this year. And this is my second time on the nominating committee in my kind of long term at UUCA. I was a member of the nominating, I'm going to call it NOMCOM. Nominating committee is too hard to say. I was a member of the NOMCOM a number of years ago. And I can tell you the process has really evolved quite a bit. And committee members have always cared a lot about creating the team that they could for the church. But the committee is now very committed to purposefully reaching out throughout the church to recruit candidates for these positions. And we're also committed to being as consistent and transparent as we possibly can about our process. So that means we've tried hard to publicize all the open positions in every manner we could think of, by reaching out to committee and group leaders and asking for suggestions, by posting notices and in the know, by making announcements at Sundays and at meetings, and by offering informational sessions. And in the last 2 cycles, the NOMCOM has asked candidates, that's me, reminding me that I need to talk today. Okay. Over the last 2 cycles, the NOMCOM has asked candidates to answer a uniform set of interest questions. And then we've held individual structured interviews for the board positions, which means that each of our candidates have spent 30 to 45 minutes with our committee answering the same list of questions. And then we've also tried hard to make our internal processes as fair and intentional as we can. For example, at our meetings, we go around the room and make sure that everyone is heard at every decision point. And we employ a process using what we call a challenge captain. So at the beginning of every meeting, one person is appointed challenge captain. And you might call them a devil's advocate. And that person's role is to pay attention throughout the meeting to instances where we may have ignored or discounted important alternative perspectives, or we may have fallen into a white supremacy thinking or engaged in groupthink. And that person's role is to bring those instances to our attention. And we've taken a lot of time and care to do our work diligently and to set up our processes for future years. To give you an idea, we've had 16 or 17 meetings since the fall, plus numerous hours of individual effort. We also conducted a needs assessment with every member of the board about their views as to what skills and characteristics would be good for the new board to have. And in all of our meetings and deliberations, we were attempting to create the best possible team to lead the congregation. And we were hoping for a balance of, everything, talents, skills, perspectives, personality traits, generations, gender characteristics, races, all of which would complement each other and make for healthy board debate. And that's nearly impossible to create the ideally diverse team. But we are pleased that this slate of people we're nominating will bring important balancing characteristics to the team. So we're going to have people with lots of experience in institutional memory and newer members with new energy, passion, and commitment. And we're going to have folks with a diversity of perspective on how to work towards the beloved community that we all want. And this team also brings a balance of talents in social, emotional intelligence and process, and administrative know-how and efficiency. So that's our team, that's our process. Before I take questions, I just wanted to say one more thing, which is that next year, a different group of positions will be up for election. And that'll be finance officer, secretary, and at-large board member. And if you're interested or even interested in learning about any of that or positions on the nominating committee, consider talking to one of the folks who's going to be doing the job or has done the job, or to a nominating committee member, or consider signing up for the next leadership training class, which I think and hope will be planned for the fall. And you can also sit in on a board meeting if you'd like. All of the board meetings are open to our members. You're not invited to speak unless you're actually on the agenda, but you can participate, and they are the fourth Tuesday at 6:45. They're usually hybrid. So thanks for listening. That was maybe longer than I meant to be. And what questions do you have for me or any of our members? Uh-oh, I bored you guys.
See any.
I bored you guys to tears.
I don't see any raised hands at this point. Wow.
The other thing is,
Okay.
everybody should have the slate and the bios. So there are photos and bios of each of those people, and they should have it in their email because there was an e-blast earlier today. But if you don't have it, let me know. And I think we were going to try to drop it in the chat, but I think we have a problem putting it in the chat because Graham was going to do that and he doesn't have permission.
Well, no, I put it in the chat, but it seems like some of the folks that are trying to access it may not have permission.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
Okay.
But the link that I posted, there's nothing different in that
address
link.
that, so I could try to
Yeah.
post the link that people can.
Okay. But everything that's on that link is what is in the email blast that Carrie sent out just a few moments ago.
Or Reverend A send it out for us.
Okay, we have questions from Heather Millar and Reverend AZ. So Heather, you're first.
No question. I just want to compliment the work of the nominating committee. I've seen lots of publicity requesting nominations, and I've also served on the nominating committee, so I know it is a challenging task. So I want to thank the members of the committee and congratulate you on a job well done. And I want to say publicly, Jane, I'm heartbroken, but I continue to love and support you.
Thank you. Reverend Anastasia, would you like to speak next?
Yeah, I was just going to say a similar thing around thank you so much to the nominating committee. I've seen a variety of nominating committees in different contexts and different boards, both UUs and non-UUs. I've never known a committee as diligent as this one has been, as thoughtful, as engaged, and I think it really shows in the slate. So just thank you for all the work.
We lost your sound, or I did.
Yeah, I did. Okay. Any other questions or comments? I'm checking both pages of and there are some people who I only see their names, but if you will raise your digital hand, I can get to you at some point. Okay, well, I think that's all we have for the nominating committee. Next on our agenda is an update from Beak.
Hello, everybody. It's Jean, and I'm back with more news from Beak. To bring you up to date, to bring us up to date. But I want to take a detour for a moment into the history of UUCA because it's important now. I had a chance to talk with Reverend Fred while I was working on this and also on another project. The first small fellowship was formed in 1956, met in homes, purchased an old church building, then purchased 3 acres at this site, which was then pretty much out in the country, not close to the city of Annapolis at all, and built a building. Dedicated this building, the one where we attend on Sundays and many other days too, in 1969. According to Reverend Fred, the neighbors were not pleased with having UUs next door, particularly a farmer who owned an adjacent parcel. In November 19, as they moved in 1969 with a completed building, the one that we go to church in. In November 1974, an arsonist set fire to the church. The sanctuary was gutted and closed for a whole year, while volunteers worked together to rebuild the church. Over the years, the congregation has renovated and modernized the building, and many in this room were part of that. And there's a great deal of volunteer effort. And over the years, various committees and many of you on this phone call were energized to make additions to the building, to renovate it. The Building Expansion, say it slowly, Building Expansion Exploratory Committee for NBEAC was formed and really did a tremendous amount of work, particularly on the lower level of the church. In 2018, under leadership of Paul Jorgensen, BEAC came back to life under the acronym of BEAC 2, convened to review needs for expansion. 3 phases were proposed: additional classrooms, additional fellowship hall, and renovating the narthex and kitchen area to allow more space. And we decided on the 3rd. Going back to the congregation to talk. Did I mess up? I'm sorry. Okay. Just to bring us up to date. So we began the work of this renovation, always remembering that renovation is more expensive than new construction. Began it nearly 2 years ago. And what we've discovered in the process is that some of the things that happened a long time ago make it difficult to renovate, particularly to add more space and more weight to the current building. So we had hoped to be finished for the congregational meeting on the 21st, 2 weeks from today, and we won't. Any of you who've seen the building from the outside recently know that. Most recently, when we began to open up the narthex and start a new way to support it, we needed to go into the subfloor to see what was going on. And what we found was a lot of what happened 50 years ago when the building was reconstructed. And it's not strong enough to hold up the building currently and open up the narthex. There are 4-inch blocks instead of 8-inch blocks in the subfloor. There are places where mortar is missing. There's really been a need to reconstruct the flooring. I will remind myself that it's worked for 50 years, but we're putting more demands on it now, and it's simply not sufficient. So all of this is filling in the blanks for what's happened over 50 years with this building, and saying that no, we're not finished on time, and we project an additional $50,000, and that's a projection right now because we don't quite know what we'll find out next, but we think another $50,000 will be required to finish the building. to finish the renovation. At that point, I think we'll just open to questions. Or comments.
Gene, this is Thornell.
Hi, Thornell.
I happen to learn today that what you're seeing is what's not unusual. That when you buy a building, you should be putting in 1/50th of the value of the building every year, because over 50 years, you will actually buy the building again. And that's what you're seeing.
That's what we're seeing. Good,
Right.
Good insight, and the 50 years is right on, and we haven't been able to put that in because of many other demands, but good work for the board in the future.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Other comments?
There's someone from finance that can speak to what our conference or endowment that can speak to our last meeting.
Yeah, so the endowment committee met with our what do you call him? The person who does our investments, our investment
Financial advisor.
financial advisor. Thank you. And also had discussion about the plan that the board had voted on, and what the board suggested was that there were several suggestions about how to raise that $50,000. And what the decision was to ask the endowment committee if it would consider lending that $50,000 to UUCA, and we would pay that back with interest over time. We haven't set the time, but that 10 years. Okay. Carolyn, I didn't see you here. Would you like to discuss this?
Sure. This, as you probably know, typically the endowment fund has been used to provide grants to nonprofits that are providing different services in our neighborhood, primarily locally, but we've also given internationally, supporting women entrepreneurs in the Philippines. But there's also a part of the mission of the endowment fund is to respond to special projects and emergencies that arise in our church. And although we allocated, I don't know the percentage, above the estimated cost for overruns, this recent finding, structural finding, or the lack thereof, of structure, seem to meet the criteria of an emergency situation. This is something that has to be handled now, and postponing it it probably just wouldn't work, and it would just be more costly down the road. So the endowment board did, or endowment committee did, agree to make a 10-year loan to the church to be amortized over the 10 years at 3 3/4% interest rate. And with the stipulation that the endowment fund would be repaid first when monies became available, but that payments would start the month after the money was drawn.
Good. I see that Patty and Don Patterson have a hand raised. Would you like to speak next?
Yeah, Patty here. I've watched enough of HGTV to know that open walls and scary things are revealed, and we're talking about a building that has undergone, I think not just one but 2 arsons and et cetera, and work over the years. So not entirely surprising. My question is, will there be a report at the congregational meeting outlining what has been spent, what was the outset expected expenditure for this project, and then what has been had to be raised in the interim up to this point in order to get us where we are, and therefore we need another $50,000.
Yes, we will.
Great, thank you.
I was also wondering, what is the current balance of our portfolio?
In the endowment fund,
Yes,
it is a
Like
little,
1.1.
okay, thank you.
Okay, I see Karen Murphy Cadell has her hand raised.
Oh, so in terms of paying back the loan, so does that mean we're looking to increase pledges, or how does that get paid?
the
Well,
endowment committee did not stipulate. That is for the board and to the executive branch, as it were, to determine.
And I would say, as far as my assumption is it is going to be reflected in our operating funds. So we'll have to consider that once we have clarity about the repayment amount and schedule.
thank
Does
you,
work
Karen.
out to about $500 a month
Mhm.
uh, for 10 years. Hopefully, we'll find a way to pay it off sooner than that.
Yeah.
Okay, I just lost my video feed. I hope you can still hear me.
Mhm.
I'm back.
Oh.
Okay, do I see any other hands raised? Go ahead, Don.
I was just
What?
curious how this loan will relate to our other balloon mortgage that we have on, for the project and everything.
Can you say more specifically what you mean?
Is it talked about one being a priority over another one, and how much of an additional burden is this going to be on the budget, along with the construction bid mortgage?
I could try to answer that, but it might be related to the next topic on our agenda, which is the Lawrence Street property and selling it. But in a brief part is we would hope to use money from the sale of the Lawrence Street property to pay off these construction loans / debt, and see where that gets us. Part of why we chose to go to the endowment versus to back to our commercial lender is we're basically paying interest to ourselves versus to a third party. We also have more favorable terms and loans, and there's no setup fees or additional kind of cost than that. So it's highly cost effective and feel like it's reasonable to do. And we want to pay off both of these debts as reasonably rapidly as possible. And we're going to have to see where that sale gets us to. One of the things that we we think is likely is that we'll do some sort of campaign to pay off any remaining debt a little further down the line, but before that bloom period really hits us. So we have to look at the money coming in and where is it best applied, and we don't have those specific yet. But that's why these two are, have two different loans related to the beach construction work.
And I'll add to that, without doing anything related to selling our property, we budgeted some to pay back our principal interest and we are paying that every month. It's a little more than we expected. So between that and the $500 over the course of the year, we're probably looking at, my quick calculation was like an additional $10,000 without paying anything off So, and I can show you how I came up with that number really quickly. But we pay about $1,600 a month and some change for the loan right now, the $300,000 loan, and we haven't used it all yet, but we will soon. And then you add the 500 on top of that, but we only budgeted 15,000 for payback of in the budget for expenses related to construction loans. So we would definitely have an increase in expenses if we don't do anything with the next topic we're going to discuss, as Anastasia said.
Before we get to the next topic, Heather Millar has her hand raised.
I'm curious about deciding interest to a loan from endowment, which is a loan from us, and then how that particular number came up.
Better terms than the bank.
Caroline, you're speaking and you're muted.
The terms were definitely better than the bank would have given us. Also, this money from speaking with the investment financial advisor, there were monies in the endowment fund that were not getting more than that amount in interest. And therefore, it seemed okay to withdraw those, use those funds, and to have the church have access to them instead. Does that answer your question, Heather?
Was this the amount that let's see. Is this the amount that we're giving up? Or is this more than the amount that we're giving up?
The 50,000 is the amount that
the loan, the 3 whatever percent. Is that the rate that this funds we're using was getting, or were they getting less than that?
I think they were getting a little less than that, between 2 and 3 from listening to the advisor. Very conservatively invested.
Yeah. I don't know. It just seems to me that the 3+ percent, but it's paying us, so I'm okay.
Well, the Harbor Bank loan is 4.25%, and we agreed on that amount as a committee as a reasonable amount of interest to pay back ourselves. It was just sort of consensus of the group.
Okay, I don't see any other questions about this. Let me give you a chance to think about it. Any other questions? Then let's take the next step and hear from Scott Eden, who's going to tell us about Lawrence Avenue property.
Great. Yeah, okay. Hello. Thanks for letting me be in your meeting. Let's see. So in terms of where we are, things that have happened, obviously the court thing took place. And so we have Mr. Lewis's stuff off our property. Margaret Martin has marked the corners of the property and had the fences put in that you probably have seen to mark the property edges, corners. And her feeling is that we want to have the property look as good as possible before a realtor comes to look at it, because first impressions matter in terms of the realtors work with us. And so I've had 2 sessions out there cutting back vines and trying to get the thicketish part of that pushed back. And I'm over the next couple of weeks, I think I should be able to get it completely cleared out. And where the parking is, it drops down maybe 8 feet and then goes another like 15, 20 feet before it drops into the ravine. And so I think Margaret wants whoever's looking at the property to understand that that's there and that it's that is potential backyard, so it's more valuable. It was with the concept. So and I think the Learning Our Land group will be working next Saturday, and we'll be focused on getting that area cleaned up as well. And we're not trying to clean all the way down to the bottom of the ravine, just over to where it drops into the ravine. And there is trash and stuff to pull out of there because it was used as a dump to a degree. So, and I think that once we do that, then I think it's ready to have a realtor take a look at it and get started with trying to sell it. Does that give you the information you need, or?
At the congregational meeting, we will be asking the following motion. The congregation authorizes the sale of our Lawrence Avenue property by the executives with board approval of the specific terms of sale, and we'll be looking for a yay or nay vote. So if that jogs your mind for some other questions, we'd be happy to entertain questions. Okay.
Does anybody know on this call, history-wise, how much we paid for it? And I haven't done any research, and how much that land might be worth?
We paid $240,000 for it. And it's currently, let's see, I think that the county tax assessment had it, I think, a little bit higher than that, but not much higher than that. But I don't know how that relates to actual sales prices.
When we bought it, it had a house on it that we thought we could rehab.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it does have well and septic. So it's a buildable
It's certainly
lot.
a buildable lot.
Yeah.
And it theoretically could be broken into 2 lots, but that would be kind of the judgment of whoever purchased it.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Margaret Martin.
Oh,
yes,
great.
Unfortunately, since we bought the house, the county has aggressively required people to go on county water. And so it could be, and I don't need to discuss all these minutia details with 3 different groups of people, but it could be that we will, or whoever buys it will be required to connect to public water. So it's not a cut and dry situation, and they may even be required to do sewer. Let's just hope that doesn't happen. So there you go.
There is a question in the chat, and I don't know the answer to it, but Scott, perhaps you do, or Diane, you might. What is the proportion of our current property represented by the Lawrence Street property?
Well, the Lawrence property is right around 1 acre. And I believe we have either 8 or 9 acres. I can't remember which.
Yeah, I think it was 9.
Yeah, closer to 9, I believe, as well.
Okay. Yeah, so
Okay.
1/9 of our property would be gone from selling it.
But it's separate from the rest of our property by the
Right.
street.
It's not
Correct.
contiguous. Yeah.
Yeah, counting Lawrence Street, our property is divided into 4 separate parcels. One where the main church is, the Foz house is a parcel, and then the way back, the extended Foz parking in the field is a 3rd parcel, and then Lawrence is the 4th.
Great. Thank you, Jen. That was a good question. Anyone else?
Peggy had the question about.
Oh, Peggy did. Yes, Peggy, I'm sorry.
I was just wondering what would we do for additional parking?
Sure. I think that there is potential for parking in the lot going from the church toward Du Bois. On the left, just past the rain garden, there's room for about 7 spaces there. And on the right, if you take it down to the telephone pole that's past that, you could get another 11 or 12 slots. It'd be a matter of what we had to do to make those into parking spaces. But I think that that should give us 18 or 19 more spaces, which is at least as many as the number of cars parked on Lawrence on a Sunday morning.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Gail asked how it was zoned, that parcel.
I believe it's residential. Margaret, is that correct?
Yes, it's R2. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And R2 means 2 houses per acre?
Yes, but the geography is such that you'd be very challenged. But, you know, I would highly recommend that if somebody wants to buy it and subdivide it, let them all do it. All we want to do is sell it and walk away. Subdividing the property is an extensive, expensive proposition.
Makes sense.
Okay, do I see any other questions? You can raise your hand or your digital hand.
I think
Then
ideally, I think ideally, Jane, you know, we want to let the congregation know that that is one option of paying back the endowment, paying most of our loan off, but it would still obviously, if we don't sell it for $300,000 or $350,000, which we probably can't, we would still have to raise money at some point to pay off the loan. But we have 4 years, or how long do we have, Carrie, before the balloon, before we might have to refinance?
3.5.
3.5 years.
Right.
So we still are still having debt even after the sale.
But a much reduced debt,
Correct.
depending on the sale. Yes, indeed. All right. Well, thank you for that, Scott.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I can't find the controls here. But how are we going to grow our congregation? Where will people park when we grow?
One thing I would note is that the lot at the end of Du Bois, certainly could be a parking lot. Obviously, there would be costs of doing that, but that certainly would be going to have plenty of parking if we are growing and need more parking. And you could actually do parking along right off of the driveway out to Du Bois on both sides. If you had to, you could use that as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anastasia?
I was also going to say, you know, we're in a situation where sanctuary space is as much an issue as parking space. Sometimes I actually find more. And so part about growth may be adding another service. And that again dilutes the number of people coming. But in terms of growth, one thing that has really helped us in a variety of ways is having Zoom access to so much of our church community, including worship. It's obviously not everyone's choice, and for some people it's their needed choice, and for some people it's their preferred choice. But it allows, you know, 40 to 70 people to attend on a Sunday that don't need parking spots. And so the calculus of that, I think the congregation used to have pressure around parking 7 years ago or so. It's a little different now that we have a large Zoom contingent.
Thank you. Thank you. Are we ready to move on to the next topic? Very good. I would like to talk about end statements, and or Reverend Anastasia, you may want to talk about end statements. I have one slide and I'll share my screen. I think this is going to be it. End statements, yes. So you can see my screen that talks about end statements. Reverend John or Reverend Anastasia, would you like to?
So this came up from the Strategic Planning Committee, and I think that's also on the agenda. Is that correct, Jane?
That's right.
So the Strategic Planning Committee wanted to make sure that we were talking about these end statements more regularly, that the congregation was more familiar with them and how they operate, because we noticed in our strategic planning meeting, there were people in the meeting who had never seen them before. And so if we can do a combination of both, Diane, if you could just kind of talk about where we are, and then I can chime in, and Anastasia, about these end statements. Is that okay, Diane?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. I'm Diane Ratcliffe. I've offered to chair the Strategic Planning Committee for this next year and a bit. And where we are is with the end statements that were created by the board and the executives, is looking at how do we make these real, how do we realize these goals and what have you that these statements have, and then just move forward and know that we've done that. So what we did is probably about 4 months ago, we reached out, Reverend John has reached out for people interested in strategic planning. And we had a small interest, I'll say small at this point. And what we looked at is that we need to look at each of these statements, and what we'll be doing is we pick 6 years. So from 2024 to 2030, look at the end results. Where do we want to achieve and how will we know we've gotten there? And then the steps along the way that will say for faith development, for environmental justice, for social justice, what are we going to take and how will we know we get there? And then more important, be able to create a forum for how do we know the next 6 years are going to represent our growth. So what we'll be doing is starting in end of this month in June, after the congregational meeting, is doing more targeted outreach to some people, the people interested in these different areas. And then we'll be putting some meat on the bone, so to say. And then after that, holding after-hour sessions and different discussions, ways for people to say, well, I thought faith development would go in this direction. All right, to me, success in environmental justice means this. And we're going to try to capture all those ideas of what people think, want, and would consider success in these things, and then build those into the strategic plan, and then try to lay it out so that we don't end up with something that's so aspirational, that's all we are, that we're never able to actually achieve it. And then we also want to be able to do things that along the way, in 2 years, say halfway through this, we'll be able to say, there we are, and we've met a few of our steps, but we need a mid-course correction, or we need to revisit some of these. The world has changed. Somebody just dropped solar panels on our roof while we were sleeping. We'll revise that one, and then look at different ways to say, what do we call achievement and these, and then how to keep our church growing and meeting the things that are, near and dear to our hearts. So I think these end statements represent, I don't know, very possibly all the reasons you come to church, and we want to actualize those. So we'll be reaching out to all kinds of people. We're hoping, just like this, there's, morning, noon, and night, and ways we can capture people's thinking, but it'll be over the next number of years. And I think because planning is always an input-output growth experience, we'll be looking to engage a lot of people and find you, or you can find us. Any questions? John, do you want to add anything?
There was one missing that the board created a few years back about operations and infrastructure. We did add an additional end statement that wasn't on the screen. I think Anastasia and I have done over the past 2.5, almost 3 years, a lot of work with the global end statement, trying to get the board and the congregation to understand what we mean by beloved community. And we even used those values and preached about them. And I can't say we've done that for all of the end statements, but what we did ask the board to do is to hold off any major work on these until after we complete the strategic plan, which we hope to have done by this time.
Next year,
yeah, spring 2024. Anastasia?
Yeah, I think you covered it well, and I just say to reiterate a point, the minister's executives had been reporting on the three statement that we listed four. There's the global end statements, and then there's specific ones. Traditionally, the ministers and executives only reported out about the three, thinking if you did the three, you were doing the fourth one. But we realized that there was really vital work around understanding what the beloved community is, but also like how to achieve it. What's the strategies for that? What are the metrics? What are we reporting on? So we've spent more time adding to that articulation, which hadn't been done as much traditionally. And then we report on them all. So we're trying to get into a cycle of having an annual ministry plan that then we report to the board on and our progress. So that way, there's larger strategic planning, and then there's like some more of the tactical stuff that's year to year that Brian and I have been doing. So anyway, we're excited for the strategic plan, and then setting and the impact that will have on our congregation, but also on how John and I set goals to bring before the board.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'd say is the end statements really are board work. And I think the board has been really helpful. Like when I know during the interim time, Reverend Kathleen Rollins was like, maybe we could have better end statements. And the board was like, yes, and was thinking about it. And I came on and I said, can we just keep these for a little while to see how far we could go with what we have? They're not perfect, but like, let me help understand where we're bumping into things. So I imagine that, at some point the board will revise them or consider them, because there are some ways that we've worked around how to report on things that aren't so obvious and touch on some things. But I'm just kind of letting that know that they're meant to be alive, as well as visionary and bold enough that they last for a while. So I don't want the congregation to think that they're not a high touch part of how we vision, engage, and direct our work.
And particularly around policy governance, which we're still working to get boards to understand what that means. How does a board operate as a policy governance board, which is highly centered around revising and updating and analyzing end statements. But as Anastasia said, we really have been really resilient about reporting every month all the work of the church under each one of these end statements, including the last one related to infrastructure and operations, and trying to create sort of a rhythm with the board about how we operate. And I think the board has a good understanding of that, but the congregation does not. So, for example, Margaret has many, many ideas about our land and grounds, and and is quite persistent about it. And so she's on the committee and will be assisting us with these conversations to, what do we want to do with our land and grounds in 6 years? I've heard some great ideas, amphitheater, things like that. But what do we want to do with our 9 or 8 acres or whatever, what have you, and things like that. So that's all I have, Diane. Anything else you have?
Well, no, to agree with everything you've each said, which of course I don't have to, but I do. And the other part is a plan shouldn't ever be dusty. It shouldn't be on the shelf. A plan should always be a working document. And so it could be between now and next year, the committee goes back to, we're a team actually, we go back to the board and we request revisions to the end statements to represent where people have shared ideas with us and where they want us to go. And so looking for a lot of interaction, a lot of conversation. The last strategic plan the church did was in 2005. And it had some very ambitious goals in it. And we actually had trouble saying, did we do one and when was it, and finding it. So we don't want this to be the case at all right now. We're going to do the 6-year plan and you can find us and we plan to find you and get ideas. So
I will say Stan Kiva has been quite persistent about pushing us in this direction, so I do give him a lot of kudos for that, including the Foz House, which, you know, we all kind of get quiet when you say Foz House. So we have to, that will be part of this plan.
yes. Well, best use of our property and our assets and resources. So very much.
Yeah.
So yeah. So any questions, you know, now, but I think, you know, as we evolve over the year, we're looking forward to working and hearing from everybody.
Jane?
So I actually have a comment.
Go ahead.
So thank you, I guess, for kind of bringing the congregation back to focusing on the ends policies and also getting the strategic plan moving. And I guess I want to remind us that although the board is responsible for developing the ends, it's in conjunction with the congregation.
Right.
So any new end statements or any revision of the end statements needs congregational input. And besides the fact that it's in the bylaws, it just makes sense, right? That if we want people in our congregation to be engaged in our mission and vision, then there has to be some participation in that. So
I
Yes.
agree with you, and I think that that I agree with you, but actually I think it's not it's more like a recommendation. And I wouldn't argue against it. I think you're right, we need to do it, but I'm not sure if it's something that we did pass an end statement without congregation input. So I hear what you're saying.
yeah, it's not a recommendation.
Okay.
Margaret, you want to
Margaret
go
has
ahead?
Margaret, you have your hand
Yeah.
up about strategic
Yes,
planning.
Diane, our fearless leader, you're doing a wonderful job, and you know all the words to say. I know. I was just like, wow, I think she's done this before. I have a question. I'd like to use this as an opportunity to ask everyone who's here and at the other two meetings if anyone has any documentation on the Foz House in terms of analysis, investigations, inspections. I haven't been able to put my hands on anything, and all I know is anecdotal things and rumor. So if we've had an evaluation by a building inspector, a certified building inspector, you know, that would be wonderful information.
Any other comments? Okay. Well, then let's move on. The last thing that we have to talk about is GA delegates in Article 2, and that's Heather Millar.
Oh, yay.
Oh, yay.
So I have put in the last 3 in the nose information about Article 2, and I'm going to continue my series on Article 2. And maybe not everybody here knows Article 2, so I want to give just a very few minutes about it, and then
Please
talk about GA. I'm going to share my screen, and I copied from the current UUA bylaws, the current Article 2, and it has 4 parts. It has principles, it has purposes, inclusion, and freedom of belief. So those are the parts that are included in Article 2. And over the years, probably the only part of this that most of us know is the principles, these first 7 statements, and then maybe a few of us have looked at the sources before. And over the years, there's been a lot of trying to tweak these, trying to add to these. In fact, the last time they were really looked at was 1985, which was a long time ago, for a faith that's supposed to be a living tradition. And so to answer the tweaks, and then one that I wouldn't call a tweak, the addition of the 8th principle, which I would call significant. The 8th principle is not yet in the UUA bylaws, but congregations like ours are approving the 8th principle. And so there was a continued effort to say, you know, we really do need to look at all of Article 2. And at the 2017 GA, the delegates voted to really look at Article 2. And so, let's see, I'm going to stop sharing so I can get, in this coming week's article, I'm going to put references to a bunch of, first of all, Unitarian statements of belief and Universalist statements of belief, because we were not UUs until 1961. And it turns out the first statement of belief that was referenced at a meeting I recently went to is 1790. And that was a group of Universalists came up to some statements of belief. And that was 1790. So we have a fairly long history of statements. Up until really the 1900s, all of the statements included references to God and Jesus. The early Unitarians and the early Universalists were pretty much Christian. And so they were hanging on to that tradition. So I'm going to put that, that's this Thursday, and probably around noon, make sure you click your in the know so you can get some more about the history of statements. There's some really interesting stuff in that. Whoops, I just did something strange. Oh my, why did that happen? My presentation just went crazy on me. There we go. I got it figured. Sorry about that. So there's been a study commission, and one of the main things, there's 2 main things I want to point out about them. First of all, the study commission has consulted with thousands of UUs. So when people say there's some criticism that they're putting this upon us, you know, some high up is saying you got to do this. No, this is a group that has literally thousands of UUs, both important groups, interest groups, as well as individuals. You know, seminaries, as well as various organizations that represent some of our subgroups, and then thousands of individuals. So their effort is like huge. And to me, that's pretty important. The other thing is that on this study commission that's bringing all this information together, Paula Cole-Jones is on the commission. Now, she's one of the authors of the 8th principle. She's going to be in our church this coming Friday night and Saturday morning to early afternoon. And I highly recommend we all go to that. I'm going to come to Annapolis so I can go to it because it's not online. So, I mean, there's our driving force behind the eighth principle and also a significant member of this study commission. The other people I want to highlight on the commission, and there's only 7 people on the study commission, 2 teenagers. 2 teenagers out of 7. The UUs are trusting young people to come up with statements of our core values. Now, some of us might, I don't know, say, well, gee, how can we do that? But if we don't have young people coming in, unless you're planning on hanging around forever, the UUs will die. So the fact that there are young people involved, and also in Thursdays in the Know will be a quote from one of them to show how important it is to our youth that we really relook at it. So I'm really encouraging everybody to pay attention to the revision, to look at it with really, you know, we're supposed to be a liberal faith with a lot of liberal ideas, and understanding that it's who's telling us to do this. And I'll say more at other times, but that's gives you it gives you an introduction to Article 2. And I'm obviously very in favor of this. I'm in favor of it with some tweaks, and there's still time to tweak. But not, I'm not promoting gutting the whole thing. So the process, there's going to be some meetings between now and GA, which is the end of June. There's going to be some meetings where some tweaking can be done. And then at GA, the delegates are going to vote to continue this process or stop this process. They are not voting on approving this statement or this statement revised. They're going to be voting on, do we continue to work on this coming year, or do we can it now and say we love our old lists and that's what we want to stay with? So that's what we'll be voting on, and that is a 50% +1 vote. Then next year's GA in 24, there will be a final presentation, and that will be up or down, and that requires a supermajority, and I think it's 2/3. It could be 3/4, but I think it's 2/3. But I know it's a supermajority when it's the final. This is going to be our Article 2 statement of core beliefs. Now, the other thing, I just thought of the other thing. Oh, the other thing that I learned last week, and I reported in this week's In the Know. Should I embarrass you and ask you how many people have read my article in this week's In the Know? I won't. I won't embarrass you. But in this one, I title it Hooray, because what I learned at this meeting is, last week when I went, is a revision of Article 2 does not eliminate the 8th principle, does not eliminate our 7 principles. The UUA is a association of independent congregations. And they said at this meeting I went to that some congregations don't even use the 7 principles. So we as a congregation voted 8th principle. That is our statement. That's us. And a revision of Article 2 in the UUA bylaws is not going to change that. We might decide, because as I've been thinking about this, I might want to rename our statement. I certainly don't want to get rid of accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our congregation. I don't want our institutions. I don't want to get rid of that statement, but I might want to rename it. Just a little tweak out there that I'm not going away, even though I'm far away. So we get 9 delegates, and we need delegates. Now we have several people going to GA, but they're not really interested in being delegates. So as a delegate, you can go to the, wow, the sun, I'm going to be able to see a beautiful sunset tonight. Do you see the sun pouring in on me? I mean, I'm looking out at Lake Erie and a sky and a sun. Come visit me sometime. I love company. So delegates should go to all the business meetings, and that does cut down on your time to do some other things. But delegates are really important. It's important that UUCA has a voice in this. And even if you know almost nothing about GA and business at GA, there are some of us that have been there several times and will help orient you. And GA does an orientation too, so that you will be brought up to date on what the issues are and how you participate. So don't be scared. Don't say, oh, I'm uninformed. It will take a little effort to get informed, but UUCA is worth it. So I want to encourage you to become a delegate. And I will put in the chat my my email address, which is really tough. It's my name @gmail.com, and I'll put in my phone number. I'm also in the directory, the church directory. So there's all sorts of ways to get a hold of me. And it would be really nice if 9 of you would say yes. 8 of you, I want to go. I only want.
I sent you a list, and
Yeah, but those are people who are going to GA. Not all of them want to be delegates.
How many more delegates do we actually need?
We need a lot.
Okay. Reverend Anastasia?
I want to put in a little plug for what Heather is saying. GA can be an intense affair because pretty much there is something happening from like 7 a.m. to like 9 p.m. And there's a lot of different purposes for why people go. And it's partially on a week, it's like partially during the week and partially on a weekend. If you're like, I don't have stamina for 12 hours, / I work, / it's just not, for whatever reason, it's not available or of interest to you, that does not preclude you in any way from being a delegate. So you can register to be a delegate only without registering to attend GA. You could register to be a delegate and not pay any fees. You could make a donation to help support our work and our mission, but it's not required. And the schedule for delegates, you could find online, like when the business sessions are, and to some degree, maybe what's happening in those various different ones. So I'll just say, if you're like, wow, there's a whole lot going on, but you can't do all this, but you can do this, it's available to you. And when you go to uua.org/GA, you could find information about the event and about registering. And the registration, there's a register as delegate only. And you could do that virtually or in person. But again, this is something you could do from Annapolis if you choose to carry forward this important work that Heather was talking about, as well as other business items for the UUA, including voting for the next UUA president, which is a huge and it's a huge act. And Reverend Bellacourt's leadership is going to be fantastic. So that's also, a historic event.
Great. Thank you. I want to check, Margaret, your hand is raised. Did you?
Oh, no.
Okay, all
Let
right.
me push the button.
No
Get rid of my
worries.
hand.
No worries.
Thank
I just
you.
wanted to make sure. Do we have any other questions about Article 2 or GA?
Just, I want, if you do sign up as a delegate online, let me know so I can keep track of how many delegates we have.
All right, that's the agenda that we had, but I want to just make sure that there aren't any other questions. If you've thought of anything that you want to discuss in this group,